And welcome to Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres, episode 81. Tonight we're going to be looking at the Asymmetrical Symmetry challenge that I set last week. Or really, I think what I should have just said was symmetry, but not quite. And to be honest, I think that would probably have saved an awful lot of confusion, judging by some of the entries tonight. So yeah, that's what we're going to be looking at. I also, yesterday, for anyone who happens to be interested, was my birthday. I turned the grand old age of 55, which I know is pretty young for some of you, older than others. And probably the star present of my birthday was these socks I got from my daughter, which you might just be able to see have cameras on them. So, you know, the perfect dad present, really. So, so here we are, live on YouTube for episode 81 of Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres. At the end, I've got a couple of announcements for next week. Stick around. If for any reason you can't stick around, do make sure you come back and watch the recording. All these episodes are recorded. You can find them here on youtube.com/Kim Ayres. All previous 80 episodes, in fact. Also, on a Wednesday, always worth bearing in mind, do take a little look over at kimayres.blogspot.com, because very often I write a blog post that accompanies the podcasts. And if there's a challenge, then I'm quite often outlining ideas and thoughts for the following week. And also, if you find these podcasts useful, entertaining, they do you a bit of good, you enjoy them, whatever, and you would like to support them, then buymeacoffee.com/Kim Ayres is definitely one way you can support them. Now, that is, bring some friends along as well. Let's grow this wonderful community of ours. Now, I say, leave a comment, let me know you're here. I can see that there's already been comments, busy going. In fact, quite a bit of chat going for about sort of 10-15 minutes before we even got going, which is rather good. So I can see Roy's here from sunny but cold Yorkshire. I'm surprised it's sunny because the sun's set up here in Scotland. Unless you were really in early, Roy. Garry says, hello from Garry in Atlantis. I don't think you're in Atlantis. Oh, he says, I think I took the wrong bus home. Okay. Pat says, hi all from a fairly dismal Somerset. Inga's here from Oslo, says good evening everyone. Max says hi everyone. Jim is good evening everyone from Dumfries. Nurije is saying good evening from Exmouth down in the southern part of the UK. And Rosemary is saying hello everyone from a blustery and glorpy wet Washington State. Is that gloopy wet, or is glorpy a particular phrase word that comes from Washington State? Do let us know, Rosemary. Okay, there's various bits of back and forth and hellos, and old Meg saying good evening everyone. That's my daughter, the one who bought me the camera socks. And yeah, what else? All right, Ben's here from Edinburgh. I'm not sure if I've missed any. Oh, Viji's saying good evening everyone. She's in from India. Sandra's here saying hello everyone. Thanks for the likes and feedback on my photo. And I think that's pretty much it. Have I missed anybody? Right, okay. Now, you'll also have to forgive me. Actually, Rosemary said glorpy, kind of like your dreich. Right, fair enough. Yeah, now I do have a bit of a cold, so there could be a little bit of snuffling, and if it really gets to the point where I've got to blow my nose, I might just switch the screen off, because you really don't want to be watching that. But little slight tickle in the throat, snuffles, slight bit of running of the nose, all this kind of stuff. It's not COVID, I'm pretty certain of that. It's just a cold. Maggie's had the cold, Meg's had the cold. It's been busy working its way through the family. I think we both picked it up off, I think we all picked it up our grandson, Alfie, who came back from nursery school full of the cold. So yeah, so please forgive me if I snorting, sniffling, or just if anybody notices the dribbles running off the end of my nose this evening. Hopefully it won't be in too much of a high definition. And Robert's here, says howdy all from Texas. Sorry I didn't submit a photo. Well, don't worry too much about it. We have probably something in the region, I can't remember exactly what it is, something about 15, 16 photos to take a look at this evening. So yes, last week then, I set the challenge. I talked about asymmetrical symmetry. Oh, John's here from Ohio as well. Says fall has arrived. So yeah, that's us Northern Hemisphere here. We're very much into autumn, but Southern Hemisphere. I mean, Jackie, I dare say that's must be getting into spring. And Viji, I've got no idea where you are in terms of rainy season, dry season, or anything in southern India. Rosie's here from the Isle of Whithorn, which is about 50 miles along the road from here. Welcome, Rosie. So, yes, last week I talked about asymmetrical symmetry, which, as I said, basically would probably have been better off just being called symmetry, but not quite. Because there's this idea that really what we were looking for, the whole point of this technique is absolute symmetry, actually, whilst being fairly easy on the eye, gets boring quite quickly. You look at something and if it's absolutely symmetrical, the brain just goes, oh yeah, get that, seen it, done it, move on. It doesn't really hang around for long. But if you have something which at first glance appears symmetrical, but then isn't quite right, isn't completely symmetrical, the brain goes, oh, what's wrong? What should I be looking at here? This isn't symmetrical. And so the eye lingers on the picture for a little bit longer. And that is one of the goals of photography, is you want people to look at your photo. And in this day and age, when we all scroll through our feeds at high speed on Instagram, Facebook and other forms of social media, then if you can get people to stop and pause for more than half a second, you're immediately ahead of 90% of what else is out there. So as a technique, a photographic technique, it's a rather useful one. So with that in mind, I set the challenge, and we now have, like I say, various photos to go through. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at the submissions. A couple of people have asked for feedback, but hopefully by the end of this, we will all feel a bit more inspired, have a deeper understanding of what this technique can do and why it's a useful one to have in our photography toolbox. Okay, a couple more comments then. Garry says Atlantis is wet permanently these days, and Viji says it's monsoon, rainy season. A couple of months it rains here, and waiting quite eagerly, right? Yes, Viji loves the rain, which always seems so strange to me living in Scotland. Never quite got the hang of that one. Right, okay, so where are we going to start? Let's start with Ben. And Ben from Edinburgh put in this one, which I thought was a good place to start. An idea of what we have here is, it is almost symmetrical, but not quite. And Ben says, our garden is full of leaves in various stages of dilapidation. This is a leaf from an apple tree, slightly asymmetric in itself, rendered more so by the coming of autumn and the attention of the insects. I used backlighting with a weak flash on the front to bring out the brown part, which is more or less opaque. I spent ages experimenting with various crops to produce a more abstract image, but kept coming back to the whole leaf. Everything else is pretty much as it came out of the camera. I couldn't improve on it. It looks as if this is the back of the leaf. It's actually the front. The shadows of the veins are cast on the back of the leaf, and we're seeing them through the leaf. So that's interesting. So actually, although this is the front of the leaf, because Ben set up a stronger lighting source from behind than he has in front, it means that actually the light and the shadow of the back has essentially come through in that kind of semi-transparent way. So the shadows, it kind of feels like it's been flipped around the other way. But I think it's a great shot, Ben. It's a nice photo. I think you've got, it is nearly, it's that, leaves tend to be symmetrical-ish, not fully. There's a slight curve in it. The veins aren't absolutely parallel. The brown patch is sort of slightly off to one side, and there's a slight curve in it. But we know where you're at. We know it's a leaf, and that asymmetry adds that sense of organic to it. It doesn't feel like a man-made thing. Lovely autumn colours. I think, as well as capturing, it's a nice photo. It's it's colourful, it's textured, and it kind of does what it needs to do. So, smug points there, I think. Smug points for you there, Ben. So, nice one. Right. Well, what I will do is I will periodically flip back. Well, I will flip back after each of the pictures, see if anybody's commented or wants to say anything. Bear in mind also that I am something like about 10 seconds or thereabouts ahead of you, so it's quite possible I'll show you the picture, I'll flick back, you'll start writing something, and I'll be on to the next picture before I've actually had a chance to see if you have commented. So some of the comments might start kind of overlapping or going back and being 2 or 3 pictures ahead, but hey, if you're watching this live, I'm sure that's okay. If you're not watching this live, once this finishes, the YouTube then processes this video, and for the first, it takes up to about 12 hours or something like that. But at that point, the comments aren't available. However, after that, if you're rewatching any of these that are recorded straight onto YouTube, then you can actually take a look at the comments as they feed out, which is quite fun. Okay, so Garry said he loves the rich autumnal tones of the leaf. Good capture. Oh, and Ben's given us a smiley face there. Excellent. Okay. Let's, no, not that one. Let's take a look at the next photo. So the next photo comes from Debbie. I think this is Debbie's first submission. She says, "Hi guys, symmetry." Now this is one of those where I'm not so sure it really is symmetry. There's symmetrical elements, and I think had they been taken from a slightly different angle, it would have been more symmetrical. Now, essentially, I must admit, it took me a little while to work out what it was I was seeing here. And for anybody else who's still not totally sure, thinking, is this a cup balanced on an upside down larger cup, and what's the funny kind of crescent moon running through it? Some of you may have got this already. Like I say, it took me a while, but essentially what we have is we have a flower inside a cup. Well, I'm sure you got that bit. There's the handle. The cup itself seems to be sitting on a saucer which is reflective. If you look down here, you can just start to see that inner ridge of the saucer, or small plate. If it's not a saucer, it's maybe a small side plate. But I think that side plate is obviously bright and shiny too. Now, I don't know what colour it is because this is straight in black and white, but it could be some kind of silver or metal. And so that then is reflecting you can see the handle being reflected here, but it's also, a lot of that reflection is in the shadow because it's being lit from behind. So the plate is then sitting on a table, except for the fact the surface it's sitting on, I think, is another mirror or polished surface. And so in essence, what we've got then under here, the under part of the crescent, is the shadow of the plate, and then beyond that we're then getting an extra bit of reflection of the underside at the top of the cup, so you can see the handle coming out of the bottom. So I think it's quite a clever photo. I think obviously if the way this has been edited creates that bit where you have to then go, oh, what's going on? If we saw the original photo and we saw it in colour, it would be much easier to understand, but then we wouldn't have the fun of kind of trying to work it out. However, is it symmetrical? Not really, in the way, like I said, there are symmetrical elements, but the fact that it sort of sits at a diagonal, the fact that there is the handle on one side, it's not symmetrical up and down, and it's not really symmetrical left and right. I think it's an interesting photo, and I think if this was under a heading of black and white, of crockery, of interesting shapes, of even semi-abstract, I think then this kind of photo would score highly in those kind of competitions. I think if you put this into one of these online sites like PhotoCrowd or Guru Shots or ViewBug under the heading symmetry, I don't think it would really be likely to score as heavy. But interesting photo. Thanks very much for sending that one in, Debbie. Yeah. So, fun photo. It was fun just kind of working my way through, figuring out what was going to, how it had been put together. Right. Oh, Stacy's arrived. Good afternoon. Rainy afternoon in Pennsylvania. Okay, Inga liked that last photo. Says clever one. Rosemary says the way the top rim of the saucer fades away is quite clever. Garry likes the black and white conversion and the abstract qualities of the composition. And Ben says, I enjoyed trying to figure it out too, and failing until Kim explained. It did take me a while. I didn't know exactly straight away. Max says, oh, it's achieved for a few seconds in looking at it, and then made me think on how it's created. Clever work. Okay, so good one then, Debbie. You don't get the smug points for the symmetry, but you know, well done on getting everybody to sort of sit there and work it out. Right, next one though really does come into, this is almost exactly what I meant by symmetrical or asymmetrical symmetry. So this is by, now, new to the group. I've not seen his up on, I don't think he's necessarily watching live tonight, or if he is, he's not commented yet. The Opti Phot. OPTI and then PHOT. Now I don't know whether that's short for sort of optical photography or whether it's actually a proper name. However, he put this one in with lots of asymmetries within the symmetry, was his comment. And it is. I mean, this then at first glance looks very symmetrical, and but then you start to notice it isn't quite. The windows on either side aren't completely balanced. We've got peeling paintwork and bits of rendering coming away, which is very, very textured. Also, what I also find interesting with this is it's not just, well, it's very, you know, we've got the symmetry left, right, but we've almost got a symmetry up, down as well. If you could kind of cut a line through the middle of this center line of windows. Now, you don't quite get it because at the top of the photo, we're noticing a couple more windows up here. And we've got the tops of the windows on the top line. On the bottom here, it's been cut, so we don't get an even bit along the top and the bottom. I think it could have been quite fun just to balance that one up a little bit. Either just crop it a little bit more at the top so that you end up with something like that, or extend it down at the bottom when you took the photo. But I think if you then have, but essentially like this now, so the center line, so it then becomes symmetrical up and down, or almost symmetrical up and down, as well as left to right. And just for the sake of cropping off a wee bit at the top, I think it just adds that little bit of extra bit of fun into the photo. But I really like this, I have to say. I think smug points there for this. I think this really, one of the things I always quite like with these kind of things is extra bits of information. So, you know, where you're kind of actually seeing into the window, and we've got bits sitting up here, and in fact we can glance somebody walking past that bit of window over there. There's always that notion of little stories, and in fact is that possibly even somebody down there. So yeah, stories within the windows I think can always be a fun thing as well. So well done, Opti Phot. Smug points for you, and yeah, maybe let us know a little bit more about that photo. Right, back on the comments. What have we got? Viji says, great click, exactly what I thought, perfectly symmetrical, and then started to notice the asymmetry. Ben says lots to explore. Rosemary says lots to study in this photo of the building. Stacy, Sandra and Nurije all love this photo. As Inga says, also me too, so many details to be found. Garry says, I love the architecture shot. That patina of time, repair and decay makes this a beautiful, compelling image for me. Beauty and decay, says Sandra. Yeah, so I think it does. I think that's that, and I think the strength of that photo is in the apparent symmetry. When you first look at it, it looks completely symmetrical, but your brain goes, but it isn't. It isn't quite symmetrical. And that's when you really start investigating it further, and then you start finding the extra details. So that really, that to me is a kind of really quintessential expression of this idea of asymmetrical symmetry, or symmetry but not quite. So yeah, smug points for you there. Okay, cool. So next photo then, well, let's take a look, is from Garry in Atlanta. So let's flip back over here, and Garry says, hi Kim, I included an image, here's my submission. I'm also including an image of the setup I made using the tripod. I'll come back to that one in a moment. The image was challenging as the face of the clock was reflecting the surrounding light and shadows, and I eventually had to take the setup indoors. So let's just actually show you. So this was Garry's setup. So what he's done in the end is he's placed the clock on the floor, set the camera on a tripod hanging over the top, and clearly, but you could, as we can see from this angle, you've got the light reflecting and shadows, and it's always going to be you've got to kind of move around. Whenever you're photographing anything which has got glass on it, it's always going to be slightly trickier. So he goes on. It's not turned out as well as I'd hoped, although I am still happy with my concept of asymmetrical image. It was difficult to get the light evenly distributed across the face and to eliminate reflection in the clock face, which I haven't been totally successful with. I didn't have access to a light system and a torch was insufficient. I also wish I'd had a better clock to work with. Once the image had been taken, I imported it into Lightroom, then cut and pasted using the spot removal function the number 2 over the number 3. I did it with more numbers, but then it became too obvious, so I went back to the single change. Okay. Couple of things here then, Garry. First of all, just on your technical side of trying to photograph the thing without too many reflections. One of the things here I've noticed is most of the light is on the underside and it feels a little bit dark on the upper side. Now, if we just take a look at here, I think what you could have done is quite simply, if you'd put a large white sheet of card here, standing 90 degrees up against, or on the opposite side of where the main light source was coming in. And then essentially you would have had the main light source and it would have reflected back. And that way you would have got, you don't need an extra torch, you don't need an extra light. Purely a piece of white card would in fact reflect back. And then depending on how you angle that, you might have been able to get a fairly evenly smooth, you might have even got the white reflection off the card in it, and if the white card actually covered the whole of the reflection, then the reflection would appear to disappear, would seem to disappear. So on a technical level, I think that's an option. As for the asymmetrical symmetry, it feels slightly like you've kind of mixed up two separate ideas. In a way, the clock is already asymmetrically symmetrical. It's round, it's got numbers on either side, it's already, so that's symmetrical, but it's asymmetrical because the numbers don't match up. You have an 11 on one side and a 1 on the other, a 10, a 2, a 9, a 3, an 8, a 4, a 7, and 5, and a 6. So swapping the 3 for another 2 is making it different, and that's certainly part of the technique. When I talk about the idea of asymmetrical symmetry and the fact that it's the difference that kind of makes your eye linger, you've created a difference here which catches the attention, but the difference is in the number swap. It's not actually in making it asymmetrical, if you follow what I mean. The thing is already asymmetrical, so you didn't kind of need to do that in order to make it so. I mean, I think where it would become more so, and I'll tell you what, let's just open this into Photoshop for a moment and just kind of show. Now, if this was to be truly symmetrical, what we might do is something like, let's just move that, say to there, copy, paste, edit, transform, flip horizontal, and drag it over to here. Now that then is symmetrical. And then if you want to, now if we then take that layer and I just apply a mask to it, I can then paint out So you've got completely symmetrical there, but what then you might do is just come back in and essentially just allow that 12 there, or maybe the 12 and the 6 or something like that. And that then essentially ends up as asymmetrical symmetry because it's almost symmetrical on both sides. Or maybe you want to just play around with a couple more numbers, but not all of them. So there would be ways of playing with it like that, but if you go too far, then you just end up straight back with the clock. But it's back to that old notion of, in essence, the clock is already asymmetrical. It's already, symmetrical, but not quite, because the numbers themselves have created the imbalance. So I hope that gives you some sort of thoughts and insights, and I hope the technical side helped a little bit there as well. So what else have we got here? Garry says, I could have used the polarizing lens as well, I suppose. Yes, I mean, that's another option when playing with glass. Rosemary says, Garry, have you read the book Light, Science and Magic? I'm working through it now, really helpful. And Max says, still clever work, Garry. Like the fact that I never noticed the first two numbers, number twos. Yeah, Pat's just noticed there was no 3. Right, okay. Garry says thanks. Excellent. Right, so next photo then. Let's move on. And what we have here is from another new guy to the new submission. So Matt says, I shot this lighthouse at multiple angles, but really liked the wood texture on the deck. I ended up noticing a central composition made an X for the eyes to follow. The difficulty was the deck moved, so I required a quicker exposure for the lighthouse, half a second, and the rest was a few seconds. I didn't need too long as the storm was moving. So essentially, what Matt has done here is to create the picture out of 2 photos. So he's taken one photo of the lighthouse and the deck, and that's been taken at about a half a second exposure. And then the water and the clouds behind have been taken over several seconds. And then he's merged the 2. And I think in terms of when we look at it immediately, I think it's got that asymmetrical symmetry that we're after. The thrust of it, the main bit of this is you are struck by the symmetry. You have this sense of the walkway going straight down the middle, you have the building at the end, you have the lighthouse at the top, and then there are the bits that aren't fully symmetrical. So there's this little bit coming out of the side of this building but not on the other, or we have bits of post coming out on the left that aren't coming out on the right. There's a little boat over on the right that isn't on the left, and of course the shape of the sky, we've got more cloud on the right and more in the way of colourful sunset sky on the left. So I think it's a striking composition, and I think it fills the remit. In terms of, on a technical level, there's a trickiness here with the fact that he's blended the 2 photos, but as we get in closer, what we notice is that it doesn't quite seem to fit right. We've got patches of water, where are we there? We've got patches of water which are blurrier and patches of water which are sharper, and then around the edges it becomes kind of clear that you fitted it in, but it's not gone right to the boundaries. If we kind of come to here, you can really kind of see on the edges where, and it's extraordinarily difficult to get that overlap. If you just use the quick tools in editing software, it will get it mostly there, but then you really have to go in and use the extra levels to fine-tune the edges. And if you don't fine-tune the edges, then you get this. Now, if you're only looking at it at this size, if you're looking at this on a small device like a phone or even a tablet, you can kind of get away with that. If you tried printing this up, because it was then going to go in an exhibition and behind a frame or what have you, you would never be able to get away with it. Or if this was going in a magazine, you would never be able to get away with it. It's one of those things. So I think I think the photo's a lovely photo. I think it's immediately grabbing. Certainly gets the fits the remit that we talked of for the asymmetrical symmetry. I like the colour of the fact that we've got the golds of the lights, but we've also got the cool blues in the sky behind. The concept is great, but I think it's just that bit of editing that's kind of letting you down a little bit there. But I think if you go back and play with your editing software a bit more, you could probably get it. You could probably fix that. But yeah, many thanks for sending that one in, Matt. Yeah, great example of the asymmetrical symmetry there. Right. Okay, a couple more comments here. Stacy says a very nice peer. Mac likes the work. Pat does. Vandana's here. Says hi everyone. Sorry for being late. You're fine, Vandana. Not looked at your photo just yet. Stacy loves says sunset sea. Sandra says lovely photo. Must learn how to merge photos together in Elements. Garry says I like the pools of golden light emanating from the lamps and that dense pastel coloured sky. And Viji says looks like wallpaper. Inga says I like the symmetry here. Rose says Matt, the concept is fabulous. Nailed the almost symmetry. The editing to get this spot on makes my headache. The editing to get this spot on makes my headache to imagine. Oh, Matt is here. I'm glad you could make it, Matt. Thanks. I was just learning on trying how to merge exposures, but it was just for fun. Excellent. Oh, and Meg says the sunset's amazing. Such a beautiful photo. Excellent. Okay, so Viji says, yes, the edges are blurred but noticeable as I'm watching the podcast on my TV, not on a mobile. Lovely scenery. And Mac says, nice one, Matt. We never stop learning. That's the beauty of photography. Well, that's certainly true, Mac. I mean, it's, I think we are constantly trying to master photography, and it's a lifelong ambition. It seems no matter how good we get, there's always room for improvement. There's always new things to explore, whether it's editing techniques, compositional techniques, genres. You can master one genre and still feel very weak in another. So yeah, part of what I love about photography, part of what holds my obsession with photography, is the fact that we can continue learning all the time. Right, okay, so next up we're going to go to Viji. Now, Viji had bought these leaf skeletons a couple of weeks back, and she's been waiting for an excuse to take photos of them. She said the texture in them begged to be photographed, but I had to add a dark background to make the lines visible. Now I'm just thinking here, you can't quite see, but there we go. This is where my my head's taking up the top corner. Okay, let me just open that in Photoshop so you can see the whole picture for a moment. And let's close Garry's there. So now you can see the picture. So what Viji has done is she's got 3 of the leaves together, 2 pointing up, the third one pointing down. So it's sort of what that's doing is playing with expectation. You see one, you see second one is fairly similar, the third one then doesn't quite fit. In a way though, these leaves are already asymmetric. I don't know that you necessarily needed to have the 3 with the 1 upside down. I mean, if we just take a look at this middle one, for example, then we can already see that the key lines, whilst the general outline shape is kind of there, the key lines are not completely reflective. That's a little bit like your fingerprints and stuff. That every single one is individual. On this one over here, there's even a little bit broken out the side. So you could have just concentrated on that one in its own right. I think the other thing here, Viji, is I can't help but feel that while what's happened is you've gone for getting the remit, and that's fine, but how interesting a photo is it in its own right? It's a photo of these leaves, but I don't know that it's necessarily a kind of a really engaging photo in its own right. And I think one of these things that we can sometimes have to be careful. I mean, in a way, it's a kind of, I suppose it's kind of a bit like a product shot, but a product shot like, if you were going to sell these, like go on eBay, then you could create a photo like this and put it up. But I think I remember you saying to me before that you were going to get some of these, and I think the thing with them was then how you were going to use them, whether you were going to have light coming through them, whether you were going to play with I think the thing is here, Viji, is I know you could do so much more with this, and I think if you could, for example, you could just take one of these leaf skeletons. The fact that you can see through them means you could have one sitting in the center, the background out of focus, but something happening in the background which was asymmetrical. So the symmetry would be basically in the shape, but what you could kind of see through it could be your area for change. You could have something quite colourful in there as well. I think there's a lot to play with. However, I will also completely take into mind Viji has been moving house this weekend, so isn't going to have had the time in amongst shifting boxes to get really elaborate with pictures. But I think here, Viji, I see what you're doing, but I think you could be doing more with it. Yeah. So I hope that's okay. I hope it's all right for me to be able to say that. There's a lot of potential. I think this just feels like there's a kind of, okay, so it's the leaves. There's a little bit of kind of, so what? What more could you do with it? And I think and I know you're capable of stretching yourself much further than this. Obviously, the time when you're not shifting boxes about and moving house and dealing with the whole family at the same time. So anyway, but thanks for sending that one in. All right, okay, where are we? Let's boom boom boom, where are we? Oh, Gary's asking, how's the revamped computer, Kim? Brilliant, Garry. I have to say it's brilliant. For those who weren't here a few weeks ago or didn't kind of follow all what was going on, a little over 3 weeks ago my computer died on me, and I spent a couple of weeks playing around on a 10-year-old laptop that was utterly overheating and causing all sorts of problems. Then my son has built me a new computer, which is a wonderful upgrade. So I must admit, I'm now playing with a beast of a machine, which is rather lovely. Everything opens really quickly. All the programs operate at a much faster rate, and I'm loving it. So yeah, thanks, Garry. Right, okay. So Sandra says lovely textures in the leaves. Stacy says the 3 leaves make for something interesting, but each are symmetrical. Gary's asking if the leaf shot was converted to black and white, or is it naturally monochrome? I think it's naturally monochrome, like the textures that are here. Okay, Jim says there's buffering. Not sure whether it's me or you. I think it seems here that I've got a nice little green square that says that the connection is excellent. I think Ben said it was buffering from him as well. Maybe if you're having this problem, just refresh the page, see what happens. I've got a funny feeling this happened once before. That people have talked about. If sometimes it can get just try refreshing the page. Oh yeah, Jim's actually said he refreshed it and now it's okay. Inga likes the patterns in the leaves and the monotone. Where are we? Oh, Viji says, I get it, Kim, I understand. We'll definitely put more thoughts and come up with something more interesting. Cool. John says, I like the lighthouse shot. And Viji's thanking people. Garry said, Viji says, it's not black and white, that's the natural here as well. Maggie's saying it's stopping here too, and Maggie's just in the room next door. So again, Maggie maybe just, it says okay now. Again, as far as I can tell, my connection is fine. So yeah, if you come up against this, maybe just try refreshing and we'll see how it goes. If it gets too bad, I'm sure Maggie will come through and tell me. Right, next up we're going to go for Inga in Norway, and Inga has done this photo, and she says, this photo may not be an obvious symmetrical one at first glance, with the elements placed right in the middle, but you still have symmetry/asymmetry in several places. The old columns and then the modern one. So you can see 3 columns. There's 2 older style ones and 1 modern style one. Then the shelves on the tables, the 2 women in each part of the light, one walking and looking, each looking in a different direction. And then you have the diagonal and symmetrical light column. And I suddenly remembered Meg's question about diagonal symmetry. Or is this maybe stretching the concept of symmetry just a little bit too far? Well, actually, I kind of think it is, Inga. I can see where you're coming from. There are symmetrical elements in it, but only if you then crop into them. So if, for example, you were to just take... Oh, so where are we going? If we were to just take these three columns, ignore the woman on the right, then you would you would have three columns creating a kind of symmetry with a diagonal coming through it and asymmetrical. That's closer to it. But once we've got the light streams, we've got the two women, we've got tape, this doesn't feel like symmetry. There might be symmetrical elements in different aspects, and if you were to crop in, you would find them. But the way these have all been put together, I mean, the whole picture doesn't have any sense of symmetry. Yeah, I mean, there are bits, yes, you do have a diagonal coming down one way with the stairway, a diagonal going the other way with the light beam, kind of reflective. So there are elements in it, but essentially, I mean, I think it's a really interesting photo. I mean, if you forget the idea of asymmetrical symmetry and just look at it as a photo, then I will be giving you the smug points for the photo. I like these strong diagonals counteracting the really strong verticals that you have it. I like the fact that you have one woman looking forward and one woman looking out the way. That there are these sort of different broken up bits and places, and the different textures and the different colour palette and things like that. The idea, though, behind the asymmetrical symmetry, or as I really am wishing I'd just said symmetry but not quite, is that what you do is, well, when you look at it, you want to instantly be thinking that's symmetrical, and then the brain going, but not quite. And with this, I don't think you get that. I think there's way too many elements that are not balancing out. You need to have most of the elements balancing with a small handful not, in order to really get that point across. With this, it's an interesting photo. There's places you can take the eye, you can look around it. But in essence, it's back to that idea of, if you think about, if you were putting this into a photo crowd or guru shots competition under the title symmetry, or symmetry but not quite, would this get the votes? Probably not. I think it has kind of moved just a little bit too far away. But as a photo in its own right, I do like it. So I hope that makes sense. Right. So, a couple of comments here. Stacy says she loves the colours and the columns in the building, and Jim says lovely shot, full of interest, and Sandra likes the lighting and the diagonals. Yeah. So yes, I mean, I think it's nicely lit, and I think those diagonals are really strong. I just don't really get the symmetry side of it. Okay, cool. Next up then, we're going to go to Jim. And Jim's photo, let's do this. So Jim says, this is my submission for the asymmetrical challenge. I hope I've met the remit. It's a bit tricky to go out, so I set this one up at home. Not very original, but overall quite pleased with it. Okay, so what Jim's done here then is he's created two piles of coins and then put a Scottish £10 note curved between them. So I see what you're doing here, Jim, and there's a sort of symmetry to it. I kind of feel, though, that you've almost taken too far. And this is a problem that's happened with a few of the photos, this evening on some of the submissions. Is I think it's kind of taking it too far. I think if you'd had perfectly balanced coins on either side, it would have still felt asymmetrical because of the way the £10 note, this £10 note, which has the otters, right, it's automatically created the asymmetry. And because you've got the asymmetry then within the curved note, If you're wanting to emphasize that story, everything else needs to be really symmetrical, because the symmetry will then act as the foundation, so that the asymmetry is the bit that really stands out. But because you've got the curve, but it's not an absolute complete curve, it's a slightly asymmetrical curve. The pattern on the curve is certainly asymmetrical. The piles of coins are asymmetrical. You've got essentially too many asymmetrical elements to it. You've kind of lost the symmetry. And so to go back to trying to really pin down this technique to have in your toolbox, is what you want it as really just hits you in the face as first glance symmetrical, and then you start to notice the asymmetrical elements. I will say also, Jim, which on a technical level, the otters are out of focus. These coins in the front are really nicely sharply in focus, but the otters at the back are not. Now, when we look at this photo, the first thing you notice is the otters. You notice the otters before you notice the coins or anything else about it. The first thing you see is those otters, and then you see the rest of the shot. And because that's the first thing you see, you really need to have that in sharp focus. That would work better than, you could even allow the coins to be slightly out of focus if you had those otters in focus. Or you have to have what's curving isn't something which is such a strong image that the eyes go straight to it. So do you see what I mean? Your eyes are getting drawn straight to those otters, but then it's failing to deliver because that bit happens to be out of focus. You've always got to remember that if we go back to the, what's the story, what's the narrative? In any photo, you've got your key narrative. What's the bit you're trying to tell? And everything you do with that, everything in the settings you have in your camera, in your editing process, your design process, your compositional process, is all about supporting that. It's like if you take a photo of a person, the first thing anybody looks at is the eyes. And if the eyes are out of focus, the photo is never really going to feel like it's worked, because people look at the eyes first, and so that has to be the bit that's in focus. So similarly here, so I hope that kind of makes sense, Jim. Right. Okay. Inga said, thanks, I agree, too many elements to see it as symmetric. That's with Inga's photo, with the stairwell and the columns. Okay, so Stacy says, interesting shot. Garry says, I always think Scotland's amazing for who can print money, which just seems like about anybody with a printer. Scottish money, I think, tends to be much more interesting than a lot of the other stuff. There's some really lovely designs on them. Pat says, not an easy challenge by any means. This is very true. Okay, Jim says he understands what I'm saying. Excellent. Okay, Sandra says, interesting £10 note, far better than the ones you get in England. Well, you see, each of the three major banks in Scotland, the Clydesdale, the Bank of Scotland and the Royal Bank of Scotland, each have their own notes as well, whereas when you're in England, everything is the Bank of England notes as well. So I always think, yes, it's much more fun up in Scotland with the money. Okay, so that's us. We're getting kind of close to about halfway through here. So just a little reminder, if you're finding this podcast interesting, useful, entertaining, and you would like to support it, then buymeacoffee.com/Kim Ayres is definitely a way you can do that. Cool. Okay, so next up then, we are going to look at Mac. So Mac, let me do that, and Mac says, took this at the weekend. I was going to drive the lawnmower out of the chute, but decided to leave it where it was. What do you think? Well, I have to say, Mac, I didn't realise there was a lawnmower in it. Or what was the lawnmower? So what we have here, we've got wonderful avenue with all the trees coming over, all the leaves falling down, leading us through it. If we go to the end of the shot here, I'm not 100% sure what it is that I'm looking at. You say lawnmower, it doesn't look like a lawnmower to me. I'm not sure what it does look. It looks like some kind of box, looks like sheets or bedding or something like that. I'm not totally sure what it is I'm looking at, which is a bit of a shame, Mac, because I think the rest of the photo is really interesting. and it's really grabbing. And in all other aspects is a great start to the asymmetrical symmetry idea. Having an avenue where you've got these trees beautifully kind of meeting over the top. The trees themselves, while they are both lined up beautifully on each side, each tree is an individual. Just like the veins on the leaves, whether it's on Ben's or Viji's leaves, they're all slightly different. And so you automatically then have an asymmetry that comes into it. Even the way the leaves fall on the ground. So we've got this sort of little middle section with the grass coming through here, but that's not absolutely even. And I think that it's beautiful. It's really lovely, that autumnal scene. Where it falls down, though, is what's at the end. Because if we look at this, everything is driving us down to that bit at the end. We've got all these leading lines. We've got, the leading lines of the path. We've got the colour, the shape, the dark. Everything takes us to here. Except for the fact, whatever here isn't really delivering. I'm not sure what it is. It could be a lawnmower. It might not be. It could be a pile of rubbish ready to take off to the dump. It might not be. And so it's not delivering. I mean, if I don't know, maybe if there'd been a bright, shiny, fancy new lawnmower, that could have been an interesting one. Maybe if there'd been an Aston Martin Bond themed car, that would have been really interesting. Maybe if there'd been two people about to have a sword fight with garden rakes, that would have been interesting. I think whatever it is, I think when you are setting something up and it's a beautifully framed shot, I just love these trees, and I love this path, and I love the ground, and everything is just drawing you straight into and then failing to deliver. So I think it's something to keep in mind, Mac, is that you've used some really powerful compositional tools, but the tools themselves are not enough. You have to have something that they're working towards. And as such, you needed to have something which is really going to grab the attention at the end of it to give us the reward for having looked down. And I think you do that, and then you end up with just an amazing photo, which gets lots of likes, lots of votes, lots of ticks, lots of well done, Mac. So hope that makes sense. Right. Okay, let's flip back. So okay, Max says, nothing wrong with our banknotes. Right, okay, what else have we got? Belle said, should have not said lawnmower or something else, but the shot is beautiful, full of colour. Sandra loves the trees. Vandana loves the colours. Max says, friend's leaf blower and lawnmower. I messed this up. I should have removed both. Well, you could have removed them, Mac. But then you would have still needed to have something at the end. Just the going down, because everything's pointing to it. It's like, imagine you saw a photo where everybody's literally pointing at something, and they're all reacting to the pointing, but there's nothing there. You're going to kind of feel like you've been shortchanged. You want to have something at the end there. It's not just about the trees, which are beautiful, but it's drawing your attention towards something. And I think it's really important you have the something there. Jim says, could be fly tipping. Lovely colours. Pat says, but the colour, how much has been done to it, and is that okay? I think, yes, there's possibly a bit of oversaturation with it. Yeah. So that's also an element of taste. Also, a lot depends on the screen you're looking at. Inga says, interesting how the trees and leaves are slightly asymmetric. Lovely capture. Cool. Okay, let's move on then. So next up, we're going to go to Nurije. And here we have, not dissimilarly to Mac's picture here, we've got the shape. We've got this channel in the rocks heading out. Now, what we've got at the end here is probably a life buoy of some, not a life buoy, some kind of, I'm not totally sure what it is, but it could be a buoy that you tether a ship to or something. I think I'd like to have seen a boat there, or somebody swimming or somebody diving, or a tower or something. I think it's another one of these where you've got these really strong lines leading you into something, and a little dot, perhaps better than nothing, but you kind of want something else. The other thing I would say is it doesn't quite feel, I don't think that's absolutely center. And let me just tell you what, open that in Photoshop, because I'm not sure whether it's just an optical illusion. But if I grab a line here, this will automatically, right, there we go. It's sort of fixing itself to the center. And if I look at this center line here, just pull out a little bit, I think you can see that. It's not, it's just slightly off. As such, I think you just need to crop in the photo a fraction like that. And then if we drag that, that little line to its center point, yeah, almost there. But anyway, you just crop a little bit off, and I think that makes a little bit of difference. But Nurije says, for the asymmetrical, I've cropped it a bit and straightened the horizon. Well, smug points there for remembering to straighten the horizon then, Nurije. Because if you hadn't, yes, I would have absolutely been onto that. This really needs to have a straight horizon, and you have done that, so well done. I think also you could, how much of this foreground, there's a lot of foreground here, which there's certainly, that's where you've got a chunk of the asymmetry. But you maybe don't need as much of that. I mean, if we kind of pull this up and create this into, think of rule of thirds here on the horizontal. You could kind of crop, if you crop it something like that, then, let me just show you. I'll put that there. Let's get a pencil tool. Then this bottom third is the sand. This middle third is the rocks. And then the upper third is the sun and sea. So you can divide the picture up that way. And then and I think you've then got quite a strong photo. But ultimately, if you want to turn this from oh yeah, that's okay, to oh wow, that's a really interesting photo, you need to have something delivering where the lines are drawing your attention to. And in this case, I'm not sure that boy there is quite enough to do it. Would have been great. I mean, okay, I understand. I get the fact that you're probably not going to hang around and wait for a boat to pass on the horizon. But if you had, I think you would have found that the whole photo gets elevated up to the next level. So, I hope that makes sense, Nurije. Okay, so Nurije says, unfortunately, there weren't any boats at that mode. This is true. And, and what you tend to find is this is one of those things about the obsessional nature of photographers. There is, it's like I've got a friend, landscape photographer, Alan Wright, one of the top Scottish landscape photographers, really amazing. But he goes to the places and he will camp overnight on top of a hill in order to catch the sun rising to get there, or he will hang around for hours or go back and camp for days in order to get to a place, to get the right light, to get the right combination of light and land and elements within it. Street photographers, the best street photographers, don't just go out once and take a few snaps and then come back. They go out again and again and again and again, and rarely, but every now and again, they get a photo which has the juxtaposition of the right elements of people and objects and action against a particular background. There's a huge amount of patience involved, and it's one of the difference when you're wanting to try and elevate the photography to the next level. The difference between getting an okay photo and getting a great photo is very often the amount of time you're prepared to invest into it, which also means the amount of time that you're going to a lot of that time invested into it doesn't work. You could be there all day and a boat doesn't turn up, but maybe you go back another day and a boat does, and then suddenly you have the photo you want. So going off a slight tangent, I'm doing more than I need to for this particular picture, but I think it's just an important point in photography to understand that those who get great photos, very occasionally you get lucky, you happen to turn up and the boat happened to be passing at just the right time, and that's great. But those who tend to have consistently interesting images aren't consistently lucky. They consistently keep turning up and have quite a low hit rate. You know, it could be there for days. They could have taken hundreds of photos, but only one of them is actually going to work. But the thing is that they keep at it, and until they get the elements, they keep chasing it, and that's what then separates them out from the rest of us. Okay, what else have we got here? Yeah, Inga says, could have taken a while waiting. Vandana says, reminds me of the road challenge, where are the roads leading to? Yes, exactly, Vandana. You're right. There's that notion of it's a direction. Your eye is getting drawn to somewhere, and you need to have some kind of reward at the end of it. Rosemary says, I don't think I would have noticed the boy if you hadn't directed my eye to it. Nurije, okay, Nurije says, I think another trip down to the beach is on the cards. Matt says, a cloud or coming back another day for a sunset. Yeah, actually, absolutely. That's another good point. You don't necessarily need to have a boat there, but if you had a sunset or you had a really interesting cloud shape that your eye is getting drawn to with really lovely colours, that would work too. John says the undetermined object in the middle takes away from an otherwise wonderful photo. But Matt says he also loves the idea and the area. Nurije, finding time is not easy. Trying to do it with them off work. Oh, absolutely. I mean, I get it. It's not. This isn't meant to try and kind of make you feel bad. To the contrary, what I'm trying to do is kind of open you. And a lot of our photography, because there are all sorts of different genres of photography, and a lot of the time we get drawn to things based on our personality type. Do we prefer landscapes? Do we prefer people? Do we prefer weddings? Do we prefer product? But it's also about availability of time, availability of light, availability of options to us. You know, you might enjoy photographing faces, but you live in the middle of nowhere and don't get a chance to meet people very often. Or, you know, so maybe you end up doing still lifes because you can control the elements of that. You don't have to wait until, you know, if you live in the middle of a city, it's much harder to be able to do landscape photography. But then likewise, if you live out in the middle of nowhere, it's much harder to do street photography. So quite often we develop our photography based on the opportunities available to us. And that's no bad thing. But, you know, when we go out and then, of course, you know, we want to try other things as well. So, yeah, but sometimes, yeah, obviously our time isn't always available to us in the way we want to. So look also for the kinds of photography, what you can do as well, and how you can kind of hone your skills on that. Okay, right. So a little bit of comments going backwards and forwards. Jim also thinks a cloud would be a better idea than a boat as well. Okay, excellent. Let's move on. Next up, we go to Roy. Roy, who is well known in the group for doing his black and white photography. This is from Roy being distinctly out with his usual zone, which is brilliant. So Roy says, hi Kim, this is my entry into the Asymmetrical Symmetry Challenge. At first glance, the 3 bins are identical, but 2 are the same and 1 is not. I spent a few hours today wandering around Huddersfield looking for examples for the challenge and was amazed at how many examples of symmetry there are. It seems architects and town planners love symmetry. Of the many photos I took today, I chose this one because of the colour. Well, I think it's brilliant because this one definitely just would not work as well in black and white. So what we have here, it looks like these 2 on the right have exactly the same signage and are pretty much identical, whereas the one on the left has this extra little foot area at the bottom as well. The signs, whereas this one says do not enter, this one says danger of death, do not enter, crush zone, right? Okay, whereas this one's got more of a picture of is that like a body being thrown into the back? Do not enter. Okay, so yes, certainly watch out for the danger sign. Plus, what's also making it slightly more asymmetrical is the recycle centre isn't directly behind, and of course we have the bush on one side and clouds on the other, which you can't quite see because I'm in the way there. But if I pull that down here, you can see that you've got that as well. So yeah, bright, colourful, fun. I think what I really like here, Roy, is the fact that you went out looking for it. That, to me, have smug points. Here you go. Layer yourself up with them. You know, you've gone out, you've looked, you found these, and you've gone for it. It is really bright and colourful and quite fun. So, nice one, Roy. Well done for that. Okay, where are we? Oh, Rosemary says, wow, Roy, that's as far from black and white as you can get. Stacy says, this is lovely time to dump the bins. Right, okay, next up then. So we're going to go to Vandana. And Vandana's photo is... No, we're not. We're on Sandra. Sorry, Sandra. Not Vandana. Vandana's two ahead. My notes have scrolled forward too far. So Sandra says, okay, here is my rough and rowdy attempt at asymmetrical symmetry that I put together after work. Is it along the right lines? Feedback welcome. Okay, so first off, you've got the heart-shaped dish, and it's pretty much central, and you've created vignetting around the side, so that creates a symmetry. And then what you've done as well is you've put other heart shapes within the heart shape, but not lined up. Now, I think with this, Sandra, kind of what I feel, the stronger compositional technique here is less symmetry and more, I would say, echoes. I'm not sure actually whether I've ever really fully talked. I don't think I've done an in-depth talk on the notion of echoes, but it's the idea of sort of repetitive patterns where you have a key pattern and then you have other little repetitions of that pattern, perhaps in the background, out of focus or whatever. And so everything here is about the hearts. And actually I think the symmetry, whilst the overall thing is symmetrical, I think you've kind of almost gone too far. What I kind of feel I would like to see here is, I think that that set of rings in the middle, or so slightly to the right, if you place them smack bang in the middle. Now, I'll tell you what, okay, let me try and show you what I mean here. This is going to be very rough and ready. Let's just close those. But, okay, I will duplicate that. I will cut that out, copy that, paste it, and then I want to line that up and stick that smack bang in the middle. Now, what I might also need to do is underneath just sort of try and remove a little bit of this. Not sure quite. Okay, let's just, again, we're just going for a very rough kind of, that should be 100%. Turn that up, and I'll just kind of colour this in a little bit so that we're not getting too much of it interfering where I've cut it out. Like I said, it's only going to be rough, but it does. I just want to give you a sense of, if this had been in the middle here, and then what I think you could have done is then if you just had your two little hearts on the left, you would have then had your symmetrical, very symmetrical, and it would have been really strong, more strongly symmetrical. And then your little hearts off to one side, maybe, or even the big heart on one side and the little one on the other, or both of them, or just one of them off on one side. I think that would have given you your asymmetrical bit. Because what we're talking about, back to this bit, the kind of theme that's cropped up several times this evening, is the power of this compositional technique is to really have as much symmetrical as you can. You really have the powerful symmetry, and then you have the asymmetric bit, the bit that just the one bit perhaps that is off, and that's the bit that kind of grabs the attention or makes it, or just adds the extra level of interest to it. So I hope that gives you an idea there, Sandra. I think it's a great idea. I think just lining that up slightly differently would have then really made it that bit more powerful. I think you've essentially taken the asymmetry bit a bit too far. And again, there's kind of been a common theme through quite a few of the photos, is the asymmetrical bit has gone so far that it's kind of diluted the power of the symmetry. You really want to have the power of the symmetry first, and then that extra little bit, which is the asymmetry, is the bit which really then has all the effect. So Hope that makes sense. Great. Okay. So Max says, works for me, Sandra, thinking outside the box, symmetry within symmetry. Ben thought that was brilliant. Viji saying, Red Roy, you photograph red well too. John says, Photoshop magic. Right. Yes, not perfect, but enough to give you a sense of what I meant, I hope, anyway. Okay, so let's move on then. So we're next on to Stacy. So this is Stacy. Stacy says, this is my asymmetry symmetrical challenge shot. It's the Franklin Institute shot at night with the Franklin Fright display, and I couldn't pass up taking. I centered the shot, even trying to even out the building. Behind me was a globe statue and lights that would not help taking this photograph. I did edit the photograph and change the sky because it was just so purple. There are plenty of angles in this building and it's very dramatic lit up. Now, I do have to say, first of all, yep, great. You've come in, you've noted the building is a very symmetrical one. You stood in front of it to get the symmetry. It looks like I think if you just taken about 2 steps to your right, Stacy, I think you would have been actually more centrally onto that, which to the sake of this kind of photo would have worked slightly better. Second thing here is I keep wanting to straighten it a little bit. It doesn't fully feel. One of the things I know I quite often talk about straightening the horizon, but when you've got a lot of verticals, the most important thing, and certainly in something where you're going for symmetrical, is that central verticals need to be straight. They need to be absolutely straight up and not leaning slightly, because essentially the rest of the photo hangs on them. If you think of it like a mannequin, where you've got your jacket hanging on the mannequin, the structure of the photo hangs on the central. So if we just take this and if I literally just tilt it about that, and we now have these central ones, and that immediately just makes it work a little bit better. The other thing is, I have to say, I'm not 100% convinced by the sky. The sky just looks a bit false. I don't know what the original was like, so I can't make a comment. You say it was very purple. Maybe you just needed to crop in a little bit further, crop out part of the sky. But also, we understand that a building like this is in an urban environment, and lighting in urban environments is never going to be quite the same. Depending on when you talk about it being purple, is that because it's got lights coming off it? Would those purples have actually, worked quite interestingly with the purple banners that are hanging down here? So there could have been an option there. It would be quite interesting to see what the original was. But first of all, I think, Stacy, always try and think about, how is the composition? Does it need to be wiggle slightly left, wiggle slightly right, and at what point does it just go, oh yeah, that fits? And also the other thing, which is swapping skies out is a tricky thing to do effectively without it looking false. And if people are looking at it going, the sky doesn't quite look right, then you've kind of lost them a little bit. But interesting photo, and those big eyes I think will probably kind of haunt me for up until Halloween. Right. Okay, Stacy says, was way too dark. It was black with purple lights. Okay, I mean, it does look like it's quite noisy, so I'm guessing you've done quite a bit in the editing. Roy thinks a purple sky might even work well with it. Okay, let's move on then. So let's go now to Vandana. This was the one I was going to talk about. And Vandana says, I wonder if this qualifies for asymmetrical photograph. 2 lifts are synchronous and yet 2 people on it makes it feel unequal. I like the feel of the modern machinery at its best. Now, Vandana, I really love the photo. I think it's a fantastic photo. It just it isn't asymmetrical, or rather it isn't asymmetrical symmetry. I think what's happened here is you've mixed up a couple of different concepts. Now, what you've got here is parallel, and parallel isn't necessarily the same as symmetrical. can be, but not at the angles you've done it. So we have, and I mean, I really like the diagonals in here. The really, oh, sorry, that's there, right, there. Where's my button? There we go. I need to hold down the control button when I zoom in. We've got these lovely, fantastic, strong diagonals going up from the escalators there. We've got these lovely, strong diagonals going, and those escalators, parallel diagonals running up to the left. And then we've got these other parallel diagonals running across to the right. We've got this lovely chain hanging down through the middle, giving it this very kind of industrial feel to it. I really like the colouring, the different those shades of bluey greens and the yellows and the purples within it. It's a really strong photo. I really like the photo, but it is not symmetrical. Symmetry is where the left half of the photo matches the right half of the photo, or the top half of the photo reflects the bottom, not matches, but reflects the bottom half of the photo. So symmetry is where it's mirror. It's like if you stuck a mirror in the middle of it, either top and bottom or left and right, it would look more or less the same on the other side. And then the asymmetrical bit is where you then have an element which throws that out so that it isn't exactly symmetrical. This is about parallels, not symmetry. Now, if you were standing down here, you were standing at this point in between them, so you have both of them shooting up either side of you, that could have created a symmetry. Or if you've been standing at the top of the escalator looking down, that too could have created a symmetry. But looking off to one side creates really interesting parallels and diagonals, but it's not working with a symmetry. So great photo, nicely spotted, nicely executed, wrong subject. Or wrong genre, wrong, doesn't fit the brief, but I would keep hold of this one for another competition or something. I think it would work really well, Vandana. Okay. Yep, Inga likes the composition. Jim loves the photo with the bold colours as well. Okay, so next then, what we're going to do is we're going to move on to Mark. And where are we? Let's close that, open that, and flip over to here. And Mark says, right, so Crawick Multiverse is a land art project by the landscape architect and designer Charles Jenks near Sanka, which is probably about sort of 40-50 miles from where I live, up in Nithsdale in Dumfries and Galloway, southern Scotland. In my first edit, I removed the people so more attention was drawn to the Labrador. I was in then it goes on to a second photo, but we'll talk about that one in a moment. I think you were right not to remove the people. If you remove the people in here, the attention might be drawn down to the dog, but then that's too far down. Now this photo, so this one, the whole design of it is symmetry. You walk down the path, you've got all these stones, these columns, and we're drawn into the people. The people just sort of, they're close to each other but slightly different heights. So you're getting a bit of asymmetry there and asymmetry in the bit at the background as well. So there's that, and the dog's slightly off to one side. So I think it kind of fits the remit, but yeah, almost, but not. It still feels to me like the symmetry is actually too strong. I think whilst there are these little, tiny little elements, I almost feel like the symmetry is overriding. So there's nothing offensive about the picture. It's an it's a good enough picture. It's pleasant enough, but in that way that it's so symmetrical that we've kind of, the brain just goes, okay, seen it, done it, move on. There's not really enough to hold our attention for any length of time. And it's an odd thing because you have, you've hit the remit, and it's just Mark. I think with this level, it's this level of critique is more about the fact that I think there's kind of something else missing from this. You almost want another element. It would maybe be slightly more interesting if you had somebody say, over in here throwing a stick for their dog, and something was running across it. I think that's the kind of level at which you want the asymmetry in it. Now, very interestingly, in the comments, you then, Mark, you dropped in another photo and said, I was in Dumfries this morning, could not help thinking of your challenge when I was down on the White Sands, and you took this photo. Now this, for me, is a much better photo. This one really does do the asymmetrical symmetry, and it reminds me a little bit in the way that that earlier one with Windows Opti did, where we showed the second or third photo. Now, actually, we'll try and remove my head out of the way. Let's just put this in Photoshop so you can all get a slightly clearer picture of it. So what we've got is we've got this wonderful building, and it is a very, very symmetrical shape, solidly symmetrical. We've got the two dormer windows. We've got the window in the middle above the doorway in the middle. The doorway is on a double step up with a perfectly even gate. It's designed to be completely symmetrical, this building. And because of that, and because it's so symmetrical, we start noticing the differences so much more beautifully. And the fact that the shutters behind the windows are yellow on this side and white on this side, the fact that bright yellow at the top and then this kind of more mustard yellow here, white over here, open, no one's open here. This one's got a curtain on it. This one's got a half bit on it. We really start to notice the windows. There are a couple of little extra bits, like there's a plant in this window here, which I've got. And actually what I really love is I love the flowers that are in this one. And it becomes a case of where each of the windows has the potential to hold a little story. Now, because most of the shutters are closed, we're not really getting that wonderful kind of advent calendar kind of feel where behind each window is another little story, which would be really lovely. But I think as photos go, I think this one, in terms of our asymmetrical symmetry challenge, really fits the brief, much more so than your previous one. And for this one, I'll give you the smug points. It does what we're wanting. Everything is about that. We've got a really, really strong symmetrical shape. And then that allows us to particularly enjoy enough little differences that we want to start looking around the photo and exploring where those differences lie. So, great photo. Really like that one. Thanks for sending that in, Mark. Right, okay, where are we? Let's flip back over. Okay, so right, Vandana says, thank you everyone. Roy was saying he was finding the dog distracting. Rosemary is saying, what is behind your head? It looks like there may be another asymmetrical symmetry feature. Are you talking about what's on here, Rosemary? A couple of things up here. We've got this, which looks like a lens, but is in fact a cup. We have an old camera, and we have a large espresso pot up in the top because I love coffee. And when I was deciding that I was going to be doing these podcasts, the junk that I had up at the top, I thought, well, I better have something which is sort of slightly less junky, full of mess and stuff falling off the top. So I don't know. I just grabbed a couple of items I thought looked vaguely interesting and put them there. Oh no, actually Rosemary's gone, speaking of Mark's park photo. Okay, right, so that's my thing cutting off something else. Okay, there we go. Different answers for different interpretation of the question. Okay, Inga says this is very strong and spot on the challenge, I think. Cool. Right, so what we're going to do now then is we're on to Nicola. And now, Nicola, let's move on to this one. Nicola says, hi Kim, this is my suggestion for asymmetrical challenge. I took this whilst out for a local walk on Sunday. I like the staggered effect of my daughter and husband providing an asymmetrical twist to the predictable symmetry that lies within the bridge structure. And absolutely, so this then acts as that classic kind of. So we've got the symmetry of the bridge. She's standing right in the middle, looking down through the bridge. And that's giving you a very nice, strong, symmetrical structure. But within it, we have her husband looking at here, and then we have her daughter here reading a little signpost, and that creates the asymmetry that Also, what it helps is, because these lines are coming down, we have a figure at the end here, and we can see that the path carries on and disappears into it. So in terms of the problem that we had with some of the others, like with Nurije's and Mac's photos, where you have these strong lines, but then you don't really have anything in it, this works because you have the strong lines and they draw you to a person who's there as well. So I think that works quite well. The black and white creates an interesting set of, because then the top part of the roof is dark, and the lighter part there is kind of grabbing our attention. We've got also lighter reflections along the path, darker bits of the walls around. You're using light and shade to draw us into the picture, as well as using the leading lines to draw us into the picture. And I really like that use of more than one compositional technique. And it is one of those things where I think, I was chatting to Maggie about this earlier on, that I'm starting to wonder whether there are sometimes when I'm setting challenges and people are taking one technique and they're just using that one technique. It might get the technique, but it doesn't necessarily make an interesting photo. I kind of think what I want you to start thinking about is where you combine more than one technique. You can use things like using sharpness and blur to draw attention to something, but you can also use leading lines to draw attention to something. You can use light and shade to draw attention to something. You can use there are so many different compositional tools that I think it becomes really interesting once you start doubling, tripling, using several of them in order to enhance your narrative. Anyway, that's me straying off the point a little bit, something I may be coming back to later. So to return to what Nicola says, the sky was rather washed out in the original. So she's also sent in the original where you can see this. And you can now see where she's cropped in a little bit, straightened, and then done the black and white conversion. Although in the colour, the sky might be a little bit washed out, but I think, it's still quite interesting. You could have maybe, there are ways you could play with the colour with this. However, I think black and white is perfectly good. So I've converted it to black and white and popped in some. Now, this is the interesting, we're on something we need to go off on a slight tangent here with. So Nicola goes on, where are we? I converted to black and white and popped in some tilt shift to guide the eye through and under the bridge. I've struggled to get my head around this concept, so I hope this is okay. Any feedback would be welcome. Now, you've talked about tilt shift, and the thing is that for all the fact that you've been using leading lines, light and dark, these kind of things, a tilt shift effect isn't the appropriate one for this, because essentially the tilt shift effect is where actually when we look at it, it's blurred at the top and it's blurred at the bottom. But why? Because actually that doesn't quite look right. If we consider that just immediately inside this wall here is really sharp, then that wall wouldn't be that blurred. It just kind of looks wrong. Where are we going here? So I don't think that affect's working for you. Now, I think if you didn't want much attention drawn to that, you don't have to go blur, you just darken it down. And I think if you've darkened that, then your attention's going to get drawn to the lighter parts. Tilt shift isn't the tilt shift effect, really, that you blur the top and the bottom, because what it does is it makes things look almost like a toy landscape. Now, we don't really have many here. I'm just wondering, actually, I think if I go back to Mark's Crawick Multiverse one here, this might work. You have to bear with me a little moment. And what you do with this, I'm going to duplicate that layer, and then I'm going to filter, blur, Gaussian blur. Actually, let's just take it a little bit stronger than that. So I'm now fair blurring the photo. Probably got to do it slightly more because you're looking at it on a slightly smaller screen. And then what you do, I'm going to mask that, and then paint out the central line of the blur, something like that. Let's take that down to, say, 19% and just take out a little bit just above the stone there. We've got to kind of be careful. So what we're doing here is we're playing with the idea that it now looks like it's a shallow depth of field. Okay, so what we've got then is it's out of focus here and it's out of focus in the distance, and the only focal plane is along this bit in the middle. And what happens when we do that, it has this very strange effect of it now looks like this is a model. It no longer looks like the great big gigantic land sculpture that it is. It looks like a little model, and you've got a couple of little model people sitting on it, and you kind of feel like the rocks are probably made out of little bits of polystyrene or cork or something. So that effect, that turning it into a toy landscape, is really what the tilt shift effect tends to do, in the way that it's commonly used in competitions. The original thing for a tilt shift was actually to straighten out, you know, if you're, say, shooting a tall building and the lines are disappearing into, because of perspective, you use a tilt shift thing to actually straighten the lines out, something you would now do in Photoshop, but you would do it with the lens, so to be able to change the perspective. So you're getting rid of distortion. But in common parlance within, especially modern day digital photography, the tilt shift effect is almost making it look like a toy. So this now, as you can see, you know, looks like a couple of little toy figures sitting on a toy landscape, and that's what the blurring the top and the bottom does. Now, if you followed me so far with that, what that means is if we go back to here, it hasn't worked in this case because it's not the right kind of photo. The best kind of photos for that are large, wide landscapes where you're looking at from quite a distance. Cityscapes, beach scenes, parks, elevated, looking down. These several months ago, Robert from Texas did a really good version of this with an airport where it's taking photos of planes sitting on a runway ready to go, and the building, it looks like a bunch of toy planes sitting next to a little constructed building, and yet it was, you know, a real life shot. In this, by just blurring the top and the bottom, isn't having that effect. All it's doing is blurring the wall and blurring a bit of the path, and because the blur doesn't quite look natural, because it doesn't sort of drop away or fall off in a way that naturally would, it just looks a little bit odd. And so I think, to come back to it, to basically summing that up, Nicola, is whilst I think there's these other elements that you're really, really strong with on this, I think that blurring effect really wasn't the right one to apply to this. If you were really not wanting to draw attention to the top, you wanted to draw more attention to the middle, you just need to darken down the foreground, darken down the top part, and then allow the eye to get drawn into the lighter and darker parts in the middle of the picture. So I hope that makes sense. Right, okay. Roy loves the black and white, and Jim says, looks like Casper the ghost behind your daughter. Okay, so last one we're going to move on to now is Rosemary. Please don't go rushing off at the end. I've got a couple of important announcements for next week's podcast before the end of this. So what we're going to do now, though, is let's move on to Rosemary. Rosemary says, this was a fun challenge and had me looking everywhere for good examples of asymmetrical symmetry. I was surprised to find it less common than some of the other compositional strategies. I decided to create my own, inspired by your group portrait from the Butler photo shoot you presented last week. And this is what Rosemary created. So she says, I used 2 sets of vintage toy tin cans, arranged similarly but reversing their labels. So for each can that shows writing, the picture side of the label is on the displayed opposite. So if we look over here, we've got Libby's fancy red Alaska salmon on that side, but the one on this side is the one with the picture. Similarly, the Californian fruit peaches here actually has the peach picture on this side. we've got Vienna sausage being written about here, and the picture of the Vienna sausage here. Likewise, the corned beef. So what she's done is essentially turn them, so she's had a symmetrical layout, but then made an asymmetry with the labels. Said, initially my image was overly symmetrical with nothing much to catch your eye, so I rearranged the cans to bring out a more overt change, particularly the placement of the little Vienna sausage can. This will hopefully draw the viewer in so they can explore and discover more subtle differences in the label. So yes, the one then major difference, other than the label thing, is the position of the can. So here we've got the can on top of the corned beef, and here we have it slightly to the side. So yeah, I think that does it, Rosemary. I think that I think I can lob you a couple of smug points for this. I think you've got, it's essentially a symmetrical. You look at it and immediately you're struck by the symmetry, and then you notice the asymmetry within it. You notice the labels. I think probably the peach is quite a strong one there, being orange. The Vienna sausage cans certainly create a little bit more asymmetry in the overall shape, but it's mostly symmetrical, but then with the asymmetrical bits in there, and the asymmetrical bits start drawing you into kind of have a good nosy around, take a little look. So I think that works really well. Nicely thought of, nicely executed. Excellent. So thanks very much for sending that one in, Rosemary. Right, okay, let's close that one. Vandana says, an amazing one. Sandra says, I like the still life. Jim says, well done, Rosemary, keep the best till last. Inga says, cool idea, and Nurije says, nicely done, Rosemary, well done. And John Harvey also says, like Rosemary's can picture a lot, she gets my points. Cool. Okay. So that pretty much brings us to, that's the last of the photos that I was going to show you this evening. So a couple of things now to bring up. Well, first of all, if you've enjoyed this, if you feel you've learned anything, educated by this, enjoyed it, entertained by, then do consider supporting these podcasts by buymeacoffee.com/Kim Ayres. Also, if you haven't done so already, make sure you subscribe to, go to youtube.com, hit the little bell, subscribe, notifications, all that kind of stuff. Invite your friends along, get them to subscribe, because they may well find these interesting too. Only your friends who do photography. Your friends who don't do photography will be bored stupid by all this. Now, next week, what first important thing, really worth understanding, is here in the UK, the clocks go back this coming weekend. They're going to go back an hour. We finish British summertime. We return to Greenwich Mean Time. That means, whereas it's right now at the moment, it is 9:10 in the evening, British summertime. It would actually be 8:10 in the evening, GMT, Greenwich Mean Time. Is that right? Yes, that's right. Next week, then, the clocks go back. But what that means is if your clocks don't, if you're not in the UK, or you're not in a part of the world which is doing this daylight saving time shift back to the winter, then it's going to be different. Essentially, if your clocks aren't changing, this is going to come on what will seem like an hour later, I think. Certainly for Viji in India, I know this is the point whereby we stop going out at 7:30 in the UK, which is midnight in India, and it becomes 1 o'clock in the morning in India, which I always know makes it that bit more difficult for you through the winter. Only another 5 months, and then the clocks will be going forward again. I might have this all messed up and wrong. I'm always kind of scrambling my brain trying to work out which way things are going. The best thing to do is make sure next week you check your time. Go to Google, type in what's the time difference between your time zone and the UK. Okay, the whole of the UK, London time, Edinburgh time. We just have the one time zone here in the UK. So just check it against the UK, Britain, London, which or whatever your favourite way of doing it is, so that you make sure that you either aren't sitting here an hour early wondering why I'm not about, or why nobody seems to be about, or you're not tuning in an hour late and have missed out on the first half of the podcast. So, clocks will change. Make sure you do it. The second thing then is next week's theme. I figured, it's Halloween this weekend. It's Halloween on Sunday, and then on Tuesday, next Tuesday, is in fact, I think it's Mexico's Day of the Dead. So we're coming right into this point now of these celebrations. So what I want to do is let's do a theme. Let's do another challenge. I don't think I need to do a run up and tell you all about it. I'll do some bits and pieces into the blog tomorrow morning. You can always check that out. But I will set up an event page for next week. But next week is essentially the Halloween challenge. Now, I say Halloween challenge. I will allow for Day of the Dead. I will allow for if you have any particular festivals in your part of the world which are different. But essentially this point where from the night of the 31st of October, if we go back to pagan times, pre-Christian in Northern Europe, the Celtic calendar, this is when Samhain starts, which is essentially it's the new year. The year didn't run from 1st of January to 31st of December. It ran essentially from the 1st of November to 31st of October. Only the day didn't start at midnight to midnight. The day started when the sun went down and finished when the sun set the following day. So the new day essentially started just as it was going dark, and the new year started just as the seasons were going really dark, just at the onset of winter. And those first 5 days of Samhain were always, essentially, there's that notion of almost a thinning between the worlds, where you would get more of the crossover between spirits and, so this is a time to contact the ancestors, where a lot of the whole kind of Day of the Dead thing comes out in Mexico, but also fed its way into the tales of ghosts, zombies, werewolves, vampires, the undead. A lot of the mythology in Northern European and thus exported over to America as well with the European traveller, nations that went over there. We have this whole idea of Halloween. So it's all about spiders and black cats and webs and witches and zombies and vampires and the undead and skulls and bodies and everything else. Halloween, Day of the Dead, Samhain, anything to do with you. If you come from a different culture, that might be to do that. But a quick Google search, I'm sure you'll be able to come up with plenty of imagery. So that's what it's getting. Now, given the fact that we do actually have Halloween happening before the next one, it's happening on Sunday night, but there's various kind of parties and stuff going on. There could be opportunities. There might be people wandering the street in costume. There could be, your grandchildren or your children or your parents might be having a party. Your friends might be having a party. It's an opportunity to maybe take photos of people in outfits. If you don't have that, there might be opportunities to take photos of little setups of pumpkins. Yeah, go, dig out the pumpkins and stick candles in them and carve them. That's another option. You can do still life. There's all sorts of possibilities. You could even just take some photos of some creepy crawlies, find a spider sitting in a web, or just the web itself as well. Light it with a torch. Go for spookiness. Go for anything to do with the theme Halloween. And we'll do, so that's the challenge. Halloween challenge for next week. Put your images into, if you're on the Facebook group, go to the Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres Facebook group, stick your images in, give us a little line or two behind the story behind the image that you've created. If you don't do Facebook, email me, my kim@kimayres.co.uk. My web address is just here, kimayres.co.uk. Just put kim@kimayres.co.uk. should reach me. And I really look forward to seeing what you're going to come up with. Right, okay. Last couple of comments. Let's see if we got anything. Oh, Stacy says, I do have a question as to levelling the horizon when I'm physically looking at my photographs with one good eye. I'm legally blind on the left. Sometimes I find it a challenge. Okay, well in that case, Stacy, in your editing software, there's nearly always something you can get which allows you to kind of create a line. You know, even if you do it on a separate layer, create a horizontal line with something, and then use that as an overlay to make sure, you know, a horizontal layer for leveling the horizon, or vertical lines for making sure that your verticals are straight as well. So use the software to help you with that. Stacey's right. Oh, Stacey says Happy Halloween. She's put a little pumpkin emoji up. Cool. And oh yeah, Jim says also you can superimpose the grid on your viewfinder. This is true actually. If you're on your camera, a lot of cameras have on the viewfinder, you can have like a little kind of tic-tac-toe noughts and crosses grid, 3x3 line or 2 lines by 2 lines. Line it up with that. Okay, so that, like I say, that brings us to an end. Thank you ever so much for everybody who's put all these wonderful images in. I hope you feel like you've learned a little bit more about this notion of symmetry, but not quite, and how it can be a really powerful tool in the toolbox. And I really look forward to seeing what everybody comes up with for the Halloween challenge next week. So, thank you very much indeed, and I hope you all have a fantastic weekend, and I will see you all next weekend, right? Cheerio. Bye-bye. Sorry, next week, not next weekend. Yes, 2nd of November, Tuesday. Tune in. Cheerio.